third-party maintenance and support options, an update on the SAP and Carahsoft investigation, and what Tom Brady can teach us about digital transformations. Those are just a few of the topics we're going to cover here in episode number 194 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 194. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And Third Stage Consulting is also the sponsor of this podcast. We have new episodes of the show every Wednesday. You can go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to keep up with upcoming episodes, as well as to see all the past episodes. Again, that's at transformationgroundcontrol.com. New episodes every Wednesday. Joining me, as always, is our co-host, Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here again today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Excited for our show, as always. We've got some cool topics, some stuff we've explored before, some new stuff, new guests, all kinds of new stuff we're going to cover here today. We're going to start off by getting into some questions we've received on social media. We'll get into some newsworthy topics, including the SAP and Carahsoft investigation. And we're also going to talk about how Microsoft recently announced that Dynamics Great Plains is discontinuing support, or is no longer going to have support for Microsoft as of September 30th, 2029. So we have another vendor-driven cloud deadline, or a cloud migration deadline, which ties in nicely to our guest today. Our guest is going to be Scott Hayes, who's the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Rimini Street. He's going to be on the show talking about third-party support and maintenance options. So if you're using an existing ERP system like Microsoft Great Plains, as we just discussed, or if you're using SAP or Oracle or any of those other existing ERP systems, and you're trying to figure out ways that you might be able to cut your maintenance costs or give you extended support for your legacy system so you have time to make that migration to the cloud, you'll want to stay tuned for that conversation and look at what some of those third-party maintenance and support options are. So we'll be excited to have that conversation later today. And then last but not least, after we have Scott on the show, we're going to talk about Tom Brady. And love him or hate him, he's one of the greatest athletes, professional athletes in the world, or he was until he retired. He plays American football, if you don't know who he is, but he recently retired and actually published an article in Harvard Business Review where he talks about some leadership lessons that I think are very applicable to digital transformation. So I thought it'd be fun to unpack that there later in the segment here today. But before we get to all that, let's start off with some of these social media questions you've received, Darian.
Yeah, the first question today is about Oracle Fusion. So this says, Oracle Fusion is a clunker, not seamless, but stitched together modules, more reactive than innovative. Too much reliance on IT and AMS due to complexity. No thank you. The review does not factor in many important aspects of living with the system day to day. So I wanted to get your reaction to this comment.
Well, I know that's a technical term, that the fact that Oracle is a clunker. But I think I know what that person's referring to, is just kind of the complexity and the difficulty of using the product at times. I don't necessarily disagree. I mean, it is a complex product. There are a lot of different systems that Oracle are sort of pulling together under the Oracle Fusion umbrella. And I think they're getting there as far as migrating over to a truly common platform, but they still are making that transition. I mean, you still have customers that are using bits and pieces of JD Edwards or Siebel or the old Oracle e-business suite. So there's a lot of legacy systems and past systems that they're trying to converge over to Oracle Fusion, but it just comes with a lot of complexity. And having said that, though, I'd say you could probably say the same about any of these big ERP vendors like SAP and Microsoft, for example. When you look at S4HANA, you've got to patch together a bunch of different systems. A lot of times you're talking not just S4HANA, and all the complex, different modules you have within S4HANA, but you also have Ariba for procurement, you have Concur and SuccessFactors and all these other systems that SAP has gone out and acquired, and SAP is selling that as sort of a S4HANA suite of products. And so Microsoft does the same thing. They all sort of do it, and I think that's one of the downsides of growing through acquisitions for these software vendors is they go out and acquire these products, and oftentimes you feel like you're deploying multiple products even though you're buying it all from the same vendor. So it's partially true. I don't disagree, but it's something you just have to be aware of and recognize that some of these bigger ERP vendors are going to look and feel like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great points. The next question today is, does Odoo support manufacturing modules? Sorry, not models.
Yeah, it does. So Odoo is an open source ERP system. It's a very modular system. It's a good product if you're a smaller mid-market company, especially if you're a fan of the sort of, not the do-it-yourself ERP implementation, but more of the kind of the simpler ERP system that can be deployed by maybe a slightly less technical staff or team. So that's the good part of Odoo. But the bad part of Odoo is if you're a complex manufacturer, it's probably you're probably going to find it to be pretty limited. If you're doing a high volume production of common widgets or not super complex products, then it may be fine. But if you're a highly complex engineer or make to order manufacturer that is building, for example, aircrafts or automobiles or something like that, I don't think that system is going to be as good of a fit. There's going to be other systems out there that handle manufacturing better, but I see Odoo as a good option if you're considering like a NetSuite or a sort of a starter ERP system that's more suited for the small and mid market. But once you start to get into complex manufacturing, that's where you're going to find limitations with Odoo and a lot of other systems too. It's not just Odoo, but that is one of the areas that Odoo is not particularly strong.
For sure. Some great questions today, or comments, I guess you could say, or maybe even just disagreeing comments, but it always sparks some good conversation for the podcast.
Yeah. And we love covering all these different topics, related to different vendors. And we talk about Oracle and Odoo. We're going to talk about SAP later in this episode. Looking forward to some of these newsworthy topics we've got here related to SAP and Microsoft. What have you got for us, Darian?
Yeah, this first one is something that's been going on for a couple of years now, but it's about the FBI and the Department of Justice and how they're actively investigating SAP and Carahsoft over allegations of price fixing related to U.S. government contracts. So this investigation, like I said, has been going on for a couple of years since 2022. And with the DOJ focusing on more than $2 billion worth of SAP technology sold to the U.S. government agencies. Recently, the FBI raided Carahsoft's headquarters in Virginia as part of this probe. Both of the companies are cooperating with this investigation, which has not yet led to criminal charges, but the implications of this could be significant depending on the outcome of the latest raids and probe of the investigation. So Eric, I want to get your opinion on a couple of different things with this. What are the potential legal and financial implications for SAP and Carahsoft if allegations of price fixing are proven in this situation?
Yeah, that's interesting. I wasn't aware of that being an issue or a case. I hadn't heard of it until we talked about it for this podcast. But so that's news to me. So it's good to learn about it. The price fixing thing is interesting because I'm not sure. I'd be curious to see what the allegations are in terms of how they fix prices. So that part is a little bit, I guess, surprising in some ways, just because I hadn't heard of there being a crackdown on price fixing or anything like that in the enterprise tech space. When I think of price fixing, I usually think of like more consumer facing type stuff, not business to business, SAP selling to a government entity necessarily. Although I will say if you're gonna price fix or do something shady, I probably wouldn't start by doing it with the government. Probably be the last market I'd do that with. But what I will say though is this is more of a broader opinion that I have, is that I think this might be somewhat of a tip of the iceberg of regulatory trouble. I think the enterprise tech space is going to get into here in the coming, say, decade. I think there's going to be, if I were to predict the future, I would say there's probably going to be some anti-competitive types of allegations against the software vendors, largely because they're tilting the playing field so drastically towards their own self-interest by, doing these forced upgrades and sort of getting these vendor lock situations where companies are making these jumps in mass to the cloud. And I think what'll happen inevitably, not because there's terrible people out there in the world, but because big organizations tend to do this over time, is once all these customers move over to the cloud software providers are going to have all the leverage. I mean, they've got leverage over what they charge you, what they do with your data, what functionality you do or don't get, how often they want to raise prices. I mean, there's just going to be, I think, this government check that's going to have to come in at some point. And it'll probably start in the EU, if I had to guess. I'm going to guess that the EU will probably at some point in the next decade file some sort of complaint against one of the big enterprise software tech providers saying that they are engaging in illegal anti-competitive behavior. And again, I'm not suggesting that this market is illegal and there's terrible people in it. I just think given where it's going and the direction that it's going, I think it's inevitable that one or more big software vendors are going to get in trouble. Just because they won't be able to help themselves, and they won't be able to help themselves from leveraging the leverage that they've established for themselves by doing all these big mass migrations to the cloud with these really big companies that now suddenly are sort of handcuffed by the software vendor. So that's what some might view as a draconian view, a dark draconian view of what I think will happen. But I think this story that you're talking about is probably just a precursor to something bigger on the regulatory front.
Right. Like you said, this is definitely something that could be developing over the next few years here with all that leverage. But if you look at it from companies that are implementing these softwares, what are some suggestions you have for them on, if this does happen, how can they make sure that they're protected and that they aren't getting, forced into the situations they don't want to be in?
Well, it starts with your roadmap now and what you do now. So in other words, there's some organizations out there, including some of our clients, I hate to say it, they come to us with this helpless mentality of, well, vendor says we have to go to the cloud, so we're just doing it because they told us we have to. And that's a huge red flag. When you hear that, you think, okay, that doesn't make any sense. It's good for the vendor. The vendor needs you to move to the cloud, or they say they need you to because they're going to stop supporting you and you're going to miss out on all the latest and greatest, all that stuff. But the real reason you should be doing it is because it makes business sense for you. And it may not make business sense for you to move to the cloud right now or at the pace the vendors want you to. So I think taking control of your roadmap and defining a roadmap that fits you, not your vendor, but you, the customer, that's where it starts. And it also starts with looking at and exploring what your options are. How can I look at, for example, third-party maintenance and support options, which we're going to cover in our next segment. We're going to have a guest on to talk about third-party maintenance and support. If I have third-party maintenance and support, I don't suddenly care if SAP cuts off maintenance of ECC or R3 or whatever version I'm using. It doesn't matter now because I have a third-party support provider that will continue to give me support into perpetuity, and I don't have to worry about a vendor sunsetting issue. So you have to look at your options like that and consider, how do we look at our true set of alternatives. And the other thing is you have to look at how do we mitigate risk by diversifying and ensuring that we don't have all our eggs in one basket and that we don't have too much leverage that we've given to the software vendors. So back to the question we were talking about just a moment ago about in the last segment, we were talking about how some of these big software vendors have multiple systems that they patch together to create a complete solution. There's no reason why you have to buy all your technology from one vendor, especially when they've just gone out and acquired these software solutions that are separate standalone solutions that just happen to be owned by them. So if you can diversify and use, say, a core ERP system and then maybe do sort of a hybrid best of breed sort of solution where you have multiple technologies, now you've diversified your risk and you've mitigated the risk of the vendor having too much leverage over you. So in other words, if you have all your eggs in one basket and that vendor decides to jack up their prices, or if you decide or find that someday that software vendor no longer fits your needs, that's going to be a really high switching cost and a very difficult, risky, costly switching cost in the future. So if you can diversify that and hedge by saying we might have multiple systems or multiple vendors involved so that if one does create a problem or has to be replaced in the future, it's not putting our whole business at risk. So I think it starts with the roadmap, looking at your alternatives and not getting yourself into a situation where the vendor has that much leverage over you in the first place. And if you can avoid that, that's not going to solve all your problems, but it just puts you in a position of power and control. And that's a big part of what we're going to talk about in our next segment.
Yeah, absolutely. Really avoiding that vendor lock-in that I know we talk about a lot on here, that we preach to a lot of clients as well, that you don't want to get in that situation.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
But I'm excited to get into this next article. We're going to switch vendors here and talk about Microsoft for a little bit. Microsoft has recently announced it will end support for its legacy ERP product Dynamics GP on September 30th, 2029. So similar to SAP, they're finally setting a deadline. They said that security patches will continue until April 30th, 2031. So this move obviously aligns with SAP and Oracle, who are also transitioning its users to from on-premise ERP systems to cloud-based solutions. Microsoft is urging Dynamics GP customers to shift to Business Central, which is their cloud-based ERP with AI capabilities, and SAP will phase out of its Business Suite 7 core applications by 2027. So you can see kind of how they compare in years. Obviously, Dynamics is going a bit longer than SAP, but Oracle is going PeopleSoft through 2035. So we have all of these, I mean, I guess within the next decade, all of these different vendors are saying you have to get off of on-premise and into cloud. But I know we talk about this a lot on here, about how we, say that you don't have to do what they're saying. So I want to bring this kind of conversation back up to you. And now with Microsoft announcing when they will end their support, what are just your overall thoughts to start?
Yeah, well, I think you just, if you look at it rationally and objectively, you think, okay, it makes sense that Microsoft is trying to get people off of Great Plains. I mean, Great Plains is an old technology. It doesn't make sense for Microsoft to support that long term, and any R&D money or innovation dollars that they put into Great Plains is just one more innovation dollar they're not putting into D365, which is their flagship cloud solution. In addition to, there's Business Central, which is one version of D365, and then you have F&O, which is finance and operations, which is more the larger enterprise version of D365. So it makes sense that just managing those two products, D365 Business Central and D365 F&O, just maintaining those two products, that's where they should be putting their money, right? So that makes business sense. But I think where you run into trouble is when you say, well, that makes business sense for Microsoft, and they're saying, well, we don't want to invest in support and maintenance for Great Plains anymore after 2029. Okay, that's fine. That's a business decision they're making. But then the question becomes, well, is that in conflict with what a customer need is? And Microsoft can say all they want. Well, they need to get to the cloud anyway, and any customer that's not in the cloud is just falling behind anyway, so we're actually doing them a favor. I don't buy that for a second. So what you have to do is say, well, you've got to look at, well, if it makes sense for us as an organization to be in the cloud by 2029, then it's no problem. It's a win-win, right? It's client wins, Microsoft wins, or whoever your vendor that might be imposing this deadline wins. That's fine. But my concern is with that subset of the market, which is a pretty significant subset. In fact, I would argue it's probably a majority of the market, are not in a position where they're in any where it makes business sense for them to make a switch that is working at the vendor's pace and not at their own pace. So, a lot of risk adverse organizations out there, companies that just went through a migration 10 years ago, or they've got investment dollars and priorities that they want to make in their business outside of technology or outside of ERP technology. So you've got to look at like what your priorities are, and it may not line up with what the vendor priorities are. And if not, then that's where you start to say, okay, well, what are my options? Wait, do I have to move to D365 by 2029? Absolutely not. If they cut off my support in 2029, is that the end of the world? Absolutely not. There are risks, of course, but those risks may not be as great as making a premature migration that you're not ready for. Especially when you consider the fact that you have other options. Maybe if they're going to force a migration, maybe then you say, well, let's use this as an opportunity to look at what our other options are outside the Microsoft ecosystem. Or maybe we look at what kind of third-party support options we have that might give us a little bit additional runway. So I think that's my reaction to it. Is that's great. I understand why vendors do this. It's a business decision, but at the end of the day, let's bring it back to our own businesses and figure out what business decision we need to make that's best for us. If it doesn't line up with a vendor, then let's look at what our other alternatives are.
For sure. You talk about risks that companies could face if they choose to not go to the cloud. What would some of those risks be, for example?
I think the biggest ones are going to be for probably longer term. I'd say not in the short term, but a longer term risk would be that you're going to miss out on innovation over time. Right now, if you're an organization that struggles with closing your books and generating consolidated P&L statements, or let's just say generate consolidated income statements. Let's just say you're struggling to get some basic fundamental stuff out of your current system, which is fine. There's a lot of organizations that are in that situation. So if you're in that boat, moving to the most recent version of an AI-enabled cloud system is a big jump, and that might be something you're not ready for. It might be that, hey, I just want to figure out how to close my books in a timely basis. I want consolidated financial results. If that's your priority, it doesn't matter how far ahead technology is getting, because you're so far behind that you're still catching up. And I'm not saying that in a bad way or disparaging way. Organizations will never move as fast as technology moves, and that's okay. But that's a constant pressure or a tension that we're going to see, where organizations are back here, technology vendors are up here. How do we close that gap without putting the business at risk? So that'd be my general reaction to it.
For sure. That makes sense. Another question I have is Microsoft and Oracle are really emphasizing their AI driven tools in the cloud, like Microsoft Business Central and Oracle Fusion. How critical do you think that AI integration is for future ERP systems? And are businesses going to be missing out big time if they don't have these AI features?
I don't know that it's not the end of the world, but I do think with AI, there's something different in it that I'll say that, I buy into the hype of AI a lot more than I typically do with other hypey types of things. And the reason for that is because I think there's so much you can do with AI that's pretty low cost, low risk, and not just from a software vendor perspective. Software vendors are building AI into their capabilities all over the place, which is building a lot of really cool features and enhancements and ease of use, efficiency gains. So that's what you're missing by not leveraging AI, either through your software vendor, your existing software vendor, or even just looking at standalone AI solutions. Even if you're not going to go all in on one big ERP solution with AI, it may be that you just look at standalone AI solutions in sort of isolated use cases of how you could start to use AI to improve your business. So I think it's not the end of the world, but I think there's so much you can do low cost, low risk, high value with AI that you truly would be missing out on some great opportunity to improve your business and to do it quickly, more quickly than we've been able to do in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. I mean, I definitely buy into the AI hype too. So I get that perspective of it. One more question I have here is, we talk about how the 2027 deadline for SAP is really not necessarily realistic for a lot of companies. Do you find that Microsoft's 2029 deadline more realistic given the time frame, or do you still think a lot of companies are still going to struggle to, get to the cloud by that deadline?
Both, actually. I think it is more realistic because it's not only 2 years later than what SAP is suggesting, but also because Great Plains customers are generally they're smaller customers, less complex customers that can go through implementations potentially a bit faster. Having said that, though, I think anytime you put an artificial deadline out there, it's not based on any sort of reality or realistic expectation. So there is going to be a subset of companies I think will struggle to meet that deadline. But if they start now and if they're ready to move forward, there's no reason between now and 2029 they couldn't get off the system if they've got the resources and the budget and the time to do it. And that's of course the $1 million question is, do the companies out there that this affects, do they have the resources, the time and the budget to do it? Do they have the risk tolerance to do it in the next few years? So if the answer to that is no, then yes, they're going to have a lot of trouble meeting that deadline. And that's okay. Again, if you miss the deadline, you have to think, well, that risk is potentially not as great as the risk we would have put on our business if we prematurely rushed through an implementation.
Yeah, for sure. Don't let the vendors basically scare you into an implementation just because you think that that's the only option you have realistically.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you have third-party support options that are out there. They can kind of buy you some additional time. And that's a good segue into our guest here today, Scott Hayes, who's the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Rimini Street. He's going to be on here to talk about third-party maintenance and support options, what you can do with your existing system, whether you're using an old on-premise system or a newer on-premise system, or maybe even a newer cloud system. What are your third-party maintenance and support options? Do you need to be paying all this money to the vendors? Could you save money? Are there sunset options and extensions available to you as a result of third-party maintenance and support? Those are just some of the things we want to dive into with Scott. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll bring Scott onto the show and we'll dive into this topic in a bit more detail. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Could you whisper in my ear?
I recently published my first book. It's called The Final Countdown, Strategies to Reach the Third Stage of Digital Transformation. And I wrote this book because I really wanted to find a concise way to share some of my knowledge around digital strategy and how to get started on a digital transformation journey. So in this book, I cover 3 different sections. I cover the people, process, and technology aspects of transformation, with the idea that it's meant to be a starting point, a launching pad for organizations and team members that are going through digital transformations. So I encourage you to buy this book. You can get it electronically, you can get it paperback, or you can get it in hard copy, as I'm holding here in front of you. You can get it by going to thefinalcountdown.com. You can also search for it on Amazon if you shop at Amazon. Otherwise, just go to thefinalcountdown.com. Love to hear your feedback on this book as well. So I hope you check it out and hope you enjoy.
Interested in working for a company that truly values your unique skills and experience? Here at Third Stage, we don't hire based on resumes alone. We look at the full candidate, experience, and willingness to provide excellent service for our clients. Within a technology, independent, and agnostic consulting firm, you have the opportunity to learn across industries with a diverse group of clients. Our consultants also have the opportunity to diversify their portfolio and learn across technology systems. If you're interested in joining a high-growth entrepreneurial organization, please reach out to us at work@thirdstage-consulting.com.
And I'll do anything you ever dreamed to be complete. Yes, I'm nothing that's
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode 194. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. This is the podcast that covers everything related to digital transformations. It's the tech agnostic view of strategy, people, process, and technology. So thank you for being here today. You can find new episodes every week by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. So third-party maintenance and support is a thing. A lot of people don't know about it. There's a lot of options you have in the marketplace that people don't realize. When you use an existing ERP system, whether it's on-prem or even in the cloud, there's an assumption in the market that you have to get your maintenance and support from your software vendor. And just like when you're buying a car and you get an oil change, you don't necessarily have to go to the dealership that you bought the car from to get the oil change. You can take it wherever you want to get the oil change. That turns out to be the same case with the enterprise tech market support and maintenance model as well. So a lot of people don't know about this model, but there's a lot of potential upside benefit to customers. It's certainly beneficial to customers that are in a situation where they're facing a vendor sunset deadline, like SAP with sunsetting ECC and R3 by 2027. Microsoft, as we discussed here today in the last segment, Microsoft is discontinuing support for Great Plains as of 2029. There's all these vendors, not just SAP and Microsoft, a lot of different vendors providing sunset deadlines. And that's another benefit of third-party maintenance and support, is it gives you additional runway to have that support and maintenance for as long as you decide to use some of these existing systems. So we want to dive into these topics in a bit more detail. And joining us is Scott Hayes, who is the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Rimini Street. Scott, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you here. First time guest on the show, and you and I had a chance to sit down at a conference recently and get to know each other a bit more, and thought it'd be a great follow-up here to have this conversation here today. But before we jump into some of these questions about third-party maintenance and support, can you tell us a little bit about you and your background, as well as Rimini Street, and what you guys do there?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do it in that order. So my background is in enterprise software. I've been in it for many, many years. Kind of a crazy story how I got into it, but maybe we'll get into that at another time. But I work with software development companies in the mid-market ERP space as a developer and as a program manager, and then moved into product management and then into product marketing. And I joined Rimini Street about 5 years ago. And it's been a great ride. The company's growing very fast. And to introduce Rimini Street is to say that we really established a new way of the challenging problems that were associated with vendor-driven software support. So it's quite expensive, and it's not known for having the greatest customer experience. So we wanted to solve those two problems. So what third-party support means, really, literally, is that another company outside of the authors of the software, the providers of the software, delivers support for that software on an ongoing basis, and essentially replaces that support that the vendor would have provided, but it is different in a few ways. In some ways, it covers more than the vendors typically cover, and in some ways, it has to replace some of the things that the vendor might have delivered with ongoing maintenance. And if we want to, we can get into some of that. But Rimini Street has grown quite a bit. We were founded in 2005. And we're now a company with over 2,100 employees. We've served over 5,600 clients, and we have a worldwide base of those clients and support engineers that serve our clients on a day in, day out basis. And we're a public company, traded on the NASDAQ with a revenue stream of about $400 million a year.
So it's a lot of growth in a fairly short period, less than 20 years. So that's impressive.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You guys really have been a disruptor to the market as well in that way, as far as creating an alternative. Just out of curiosity, how do, and this was not at all on script, so I apologize. I'm already going off script here, but there's more where this came from. Don't worry. What I was going to ask you though is, how did vendors respond, especially when you guys first started the company? I know you weren't there from the start, but how do vendors in general respond to the idea that now there's a third-party support option for clients?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something they welcome because that is a great revenue stream for the vendors, and it's typically a very good profit stream. I haven't analyzed these numbers in a few years, but historically, what was happening was the vendors were taking in a great deal of revenue from that annual maintenance stream, and just getting into some of the math of it. Typically, back in the day, licenses for ERP and other enterprise software packages were purchased as a perpetual license. So you paid one time for the license, you could use it into perpetuity, and then you paid annually for the software maintenance and support. Doing simple math, if you paid $5 million for your software licenses, then you were typically paying about $1 million, 20%. For the software maintenance. Now that's crept up over the years. Some of the big ones are typically 22% of that perpetual maintenance charge every year. And then there's been increases to that, annual increases based on, consumer price index or other increases. So that amount of money is not small. I mean, basically you repay for the software again in 5 years or so.
Right.
And what we were finding and what the numbers were saying at the time was that vendors were taking that revenue stream and not necessarily investing in support, but rather investing in the next generation of software. So there was a great profit margin that the vendors were taking. And if you just looked at the support equation, so some of the math said it was above 90% gross margin. So there was an opportunity, I think, to say, wait a minute, this software can be supported by outside third party. And so when we entered the market, we really shook it up, as you say, as a disruptor by saying we could do that for 50% of that cost. So if you paid $5 million for the licenses, you were paying $1 million a year for the maintenance and support. We would provide that support for $500,000. So we cut that in half. And that's just the beginning of the savings. And as we get through this discussion, I think we can talk about where some of the other savings come in the day-to-day management of those environments. But that's basically where we came in, was to provide a full package of support with a more engaging, more responsive, more comprehensive model starting at half the cost of what you were paying the software vendors.
Right. So a lot of potential cost savings there, because like you said, those maintenance numbers have crept up over time. And when you've got that vendor locked sort of situation where you don't have any other options, they can sort of charge you whatever they want. So this is sort of putting some cost pressure and cost savings in the pockets of your customers, I imagine.
It does. And, back to that question of the vendors. So we were taking away that maintenance stream that was highly profitable, which is not something they were particularly happy about. But this is, perfectly legal, great opportunity. You've seen it in other markets, where you have the opportunity to take your product to anyone who is capable of repairing that product. And that's basically the model that we're using. And it gives people options. An alternative is a great way to describe it, Eric.
Sort of like, it kind of reminds me of when you buy a car, say you buy a Toyota, you don't have to take it to the Toyota dealership to get the oil change. You could take it to, Jiffy Lube or, any discount or, any oil change service or whatever the case may be. It's kind of, in some ways, I don't know if I'm oversimplifying, but it seems like that's the sort of option you're providing there.
It is. And that's a really good way of describing it, but it actually goes deeper than that. If you think about it, enterprise software is highly complex. And if you were to just go to a vendor portal or a knowledge base or a chat room somewhere to try to figure out what's going on with your software, that could be very a frustrating experience, because this software is so complex and it's so highly configurable that what you're running is not exactly like anyone else's, right? And you've probably had this experience. I have, right? I've got something I'm trying to do kind of different in Excel. And so I go out and I see the chat rooms and I find one and I think, oh, this is exactly what I need to do. And I try to follow the steps. They've got screenshots and everything. Guess what? Even my Excel is set up differently, right? And so at that point, I'm tired of that experience of trying to find my own solution to the problem. And I think, I just want to talk to somebody, right? And you've had this experience too, where you got a plumbing problem in your home or an electrical problem, and you like talking to your friends, hey, do you know a guy who blah, 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 right? And you just want that expert to talk you through it. I'm tired of looking through random posts and random knowledge bases. And so that's kind of like your local mechanic, right? Do you have your favorite mechanic for this, 2018 Toyota? And you'll ask your friends and you'll get a great recommendation. And that's basically what we are. We are that, expert on the phone, opportunity to just talk to somebody and get this thing resolved in a short manner.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I want to come back to a couple questions here in just a moment. But first, I want to turn to the audience real quick and thank everyone who's dropping in the chat where you're joining from today. I want to say hello to a few people. Kristen joining on LinkedIn from Denver, Colorado. Thanks for being here today, Kristen. Craig Adams from Hereford, UK, joining us from YouTube. Thank you for being here today from Hereford. And then Sam Graham has been absent for a while, but he's back. He's from Spain. He's a regular listener, so thank you for being here today. And again, any questions you have for Scott and I related to the topic of third-party support and maintenance, I'd love to hear from you along the way. But before I jump into more of these questions, Scott, I can't resist this question. You tempted me to ask it earlier. But you said you had a strange story of how you ended up in this market. Can you tell us how did because I don't know of anyone, myself included, I don't know anyone that planned to be in the space from a young age.
Oh, that's interesting. I kind of had, I suppose, a little bit of an aptitude toward it, but I graduated college with a degree in economics and sociology. So money and people, right? Okay, well, I'll go into business. And back then, there were management training programs that were available, and I joined one with a department store retailer. And so I began my career, and that company's been absorbed into the Macy's family now. So anyone would recognize that retail name. Right. So I started as an assistant buyer of women's designer shoes.
Interesting.
A lot I learned of that. With economics and sociology. Right. And one of my early tasks was to predict what the annual December shoe sale was going to cost us in markdowns. And the typical way that was done, I mean, this was back in 1982, Eric. And, there were reams of paper that were delivered every Monday morning to a buyer of all the stock on hand, right? Every style, every color, every store. And to try to come up with what the markdowns were going to cost 8-10 weeks in advance was never very scientific. It was pencil and paper and a calculator, and it took hours and hours. And as I said, I had a bit of a proclivity to some coding, and I'd learned a little bit in college. And my mom was a business education teacher and happened to have an early personal computer at home. This is a TRS-80 Model 3. It's fun to look up. Looks like a machine from a science fiction movie back in the day.
Was that one of those Radio Shack ones, or
what's that?
Is it Radio Shack that made that?
No, Radio Shack. Yeah, Tandy Radio Shack is the TRS. Yeah. So so I wrote a program to ingest the all the colors and the styles and the quantities on hand and the sales over the last several weeks, and wrote, well, what today we'd call an algorithm, but basically a predictive formula to say, okay, if that's the way it's gone in the past based on the on-hands and the sales, what are we going to have on hand at the beginning of December when this sale starts, and how much is that markdown going to cost us? And I came back to my buyer on the weekend, and after the weekend, and I said it's going to cost $100,000, and this was in October. We get through the end of the sale in December, and as luck or maybe some logic would have had it, I was off by $700 on $100,000.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, there may be something to this. So, but it's not very scalable, me at home with my personal computer. And so long story short, I actually joined with the IT team to be a beta tester of spreadsheet software running on a mainframe. So basically introduced spreadsheets to the buying offices of this division of Macy's. And then a few years later, after I kind of finished my run in the merchandising part of the business, was invited to join the programming team, became a programmer for that division. And after that, all IT. But I can say without a doubt, Eric, because I'd been in women's shoes, women's sportswear, and then women's dresses, that I'm the only person on this planet to have a career path that went from buyer of women's dresses to COBOL programmer.
Yeah, that's a very non-traditional, non-linear route that you've taken to get to here, especially looking at what you do now at Rimini Street.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Well, good. Well, thanks for that background. That is an interesting story, and I've yet to meet that person that says, I knew at a young age I wanted to get into the enterprise tech space, and I decided.
Right. Which is good, because what you bring is something that matters more than the tech itself. Right. So I still have a real heart for the tech that's available to buyers in planning stocks and making good purchasing decisions. Retail is still there in my blood a little bit.
Yeah, and understanding how the technology gets used, from the user perspective,
100%
gives you a different perspective there. Well, good. Well, I want to say hello to Manny from joining us from Perth, Australia on YouTube. Thanks for being here today. And then here's a question that I wanted to ask you. This is from Sam on LinkedIn, and wanted to ask you this question here, Scott, around do the ERP providers continue to provide new functionality, and if not, is that a problem for users? And maybe I'll add to that, maybe add a little bit to that too. ERP providers, assuming they do continue to provide new functionality, how do third-party support providers fit into that? How do you guys keep up with some of these new advancements that vendors are coming out with on the call it the legacy systems? I know we're talking about all kinds of systems here, but on those systems.
For sure. So, and it really gets to the heart of this model, where yes, you do stop your annual agreement with the software provider for maintenance and support. Therefore, at that point, you no longer have a right to anything new that's delivered from that software provider for that particular suite of applications. Okay. What you do have the rights for is everything that's been delivered up until that point in time. And to be honest, most ERP practitioners aren't on the very latest release. They may be 2-3 releases back. That could be 4, 5, 7 years back, but it's stable and it's working. And so all these releases have happened, and you're entitled to those releases. So one of the things that we help our clients do is to prepare and store an archive of all of those releases. So upgrades can happen even after joining third-party support. up through that very last release that was released before you left the vendor. So those are all available. Now, then there's a question of, well, yeah, but what about the things that were delivered after you left? Those, of course, are no longer an entitlement of somebody who's come to third-party support. So we have to look at what's happening to the enterprise software space, ERP specifically. And it's during the early 2000s, there was massive growth in these applications. They were really getting feature rich and growing, and there were new exciting features coming with each of the releases. And that slowed a bit. And there was a time in which most of the software providers were then starting to develop a whole new platform, a whole new set of applications with different names and a different license. So there wasn't a direct path. Now there was kind of leaping over and getting to a different product that was really going to be the next move. And fewer enhancements and new features were coming into that software that had been there for a while, right?
Yeah.
So there's this idea that, oh, if I leave the vendor, I've got this fear of missing out. I'm going to miss out on this enhancement or that feature. Well, that's less and less true. In fact, I'm about to publish a blog post about this called "No More FOMO." I don't have to fear missing out because there's not much being delivered anymore for the release that or the product that I'm running. So then the question is, well, yeah, but what if they deliver some features that might be applicable to me? And I underline the word might because it's really up to the vendor to decide what are new features that would go into any product, if they're indeed still delivering them. And are those exactly the features that you need for your business? That's kind of that's a low probability game. What we would rather see is an acceleration of innovation that's specific to your business. And so by taking at least 50% of that cost off the table, and it can go up to, we've seen some of our clients save up to 90% of total cost of operating and supporting the software. Take that money and direct it toward a prioritized list of innovations that are going to be important specifically to your business. So no longer waiting for the vendor to decide, oh, we're going to deliver this, that, or that, the other feature. Rather, go and invest in developing exactly what you need. Is it more resiliency in your supply chain? Is it a new e-commerce option to go direct to consumer? Whatever that is that's going to change your business and your competitive advantage, then let's invest there rather than whatever the vendor might have given you in some future release. That's kind of the idea.
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense, and it's perfectly reasonable to see that. And I like that, the FOMO comparison there, or the FOMO discussion, because I think there is some truth to that in terms of really focusing on what's right for your business rather than worrying about, are there new capabilities that may not be of value to me, at least not at this point.
Exactly. Focused investment. We can't afford to just, pay for things we don't need.
Yeah. I'm here with Scott Hayes from Rimini Street. We're talking about third-party maintenance and support options. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you'll want to download the Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So, collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 194. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. And this podcast every week covers all the things related to the tech-agnostic view of digital transformation, including the people, process, technology, and strategy sides of change. So thanks for being here today. We're in the midst of a conversation with Scott Hayes from Rimini Street. We're talking about third-party maintenance and support. So you talked about these cost savings. You said, up to 50% cost savings, switching over, and we'll come back to some of those where that savings comes from, or what form those savings come from. But before I get there to that follow-up question, what are some of the most common concerns or misconceptions that companies have about moving to third-party maintenance, and how do you guys address that in the market? So if I come to you and say, hey, this all sounds great, but here are my concerns. What are those common concerns that you hear from customers?
Yeah, there were concerns, and they were legitimate at the beginning. And so we, as a company, had to decide how are we going to address those. And the two most important ones were, well, I get security patches from my vendor. So that was number one. And number two, the maintenance releases that the vendor provides include updates for tax, legal, and regulatory compliance, right? Those don't stop, right? The hackers aren't stopping their work and trying to get at your data, and the regulators don't stop in creating, new ways and new mechanisms for requiring regulations inside of your software. So from a very early beginning, we had to provide alternatives to that. Let me take them in reverse order. In the tax, legal, and regulatory area, we have a team, a very large team, that combs the entire body of regulations that are being published by regulatory bodies and legal entities and countries and jurisdictions all around the world. And we have proprietary patent pending systems that go and pull this research and then vet it against what our clients are running. Okay. So if you think about the old vendor model, the vendor would need to basically make all those regulations available to all their customers, whether they were using it or not. At least it's there. And then the customers themselves would need to apply these packs that had the updates in them. And some of them they needed, some of them they didn't. And there's always a challenge when you apply a new release of software that it could bump into something you've got running that might be custom, right? Because the vendors don't need to write for that. And so what we've done with our tax, legal, and regulatory updates is, as I say, we've ingested all of these things from thousands and thousands of sources, and then we vetted against what each client, what products are they running that require tax, legal, and regulatory updates? What versions of those products are they running? And what are the jurisdictions in which this company is obligated to comply with the regulations? And that combination of those three things is what we package up, test in a customer test environment, a client test environment, and make sure that they've got only what they need, all of what they need, and that it works in their environment, and then the client goes and applies that to their production space. So it is a tremendous amount of work. We have about 350 professionals in our tax, legal, and regulatory practice that are doing that analysis, vetting, building, testing, and delivering those specific updates for our clients. So that's the tax, legal, and regulatory one. On the security side of things, so what are you missing out on? You're missing out on security patches that would have been delivered, again, at that point after the time you left the vendor's support. And security patches are one way to help guard against hackers and challenges with security, but they aren't the only way. And so obviously without those patches, we need to be able to help our clients defend against those issues and really mitigate the risks of that security probability, or I should say eventuality rather than probability, don't you think?
Yeah.
And so what we did is created some solutions that don't just address known vulnerabilities, but also address unknown vulnerabilities. Think about it. A patch is exactly that. It's a patch over a particular hole, if you want to simplify it, in the software that has a very specific known vulnerability. And that doesn't mean it's the only one or even the only one of its type. I mean, in the security vernacular, they call that a common vulnerability exposure, or CVE. But there's a concept that's called, I think it's CWE, a common weakness enumeration. It's kind of a class of vulnerabilities. And so what we deliver are solutions that address classes of vulnerability enumerations that give our clients a greater peace of mind in terms of being proactive in their security posture and mitigating not only known vulnerability risks, but unknown vulnerability risks. But that's the effort we had to go to earn the right to be their support provider, even after the vendor was no longer providing those things. So those are the top two reasons why they would say, I'm not sure about this. What's going to happen with security? What's going to happen with tax, legal, and regulatory? And that's how we address them. And then the third one was, yeah, but what about those new releases? And we talked about that again. Fear of missing out is really your perspective on what's important to your business.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I know a lot of what you guys do, or one of the systems you guys focus on and support, is SAP.
Yeah.
And just using SAP as an example of one of the services you provide, or one of the third-party maintenance and support services you provide, a lot of ECC and R3 customers that are using, the existing versions of SAP or the legacy versions of SAP are struggling with, how do we make this transition over to S4HANA? And by the way, SAP is telling us we have till 2027 to make that transition before they cut off support for ECC and R3. How is that affecting your business? Are you seeing a lot of customers that are coming to you because, hey, we want to have an extended runway for how long we can get support and maintenance for the existing SAP versions, versus feeling like we have to rush to get to S4HANA by 2027? Or how is that affecting your business model?
Yeah, the SAP market is quite frenzied at the moment because of some of the announcements that SAP leadership has made over time. You mentioned a 2027 expiration date. That's for mainstream maintenance for ECC, what some call SAP ERP, what some call Business Suite.
Right.
And that 2027 date at one time was 2025. So there's some faction of the SAP customer base that's thinking, oh, maybe they'll extend it again, maybe, just maybe. But I have heard SAP leadership double down on this a couple of times, saying this is it, folks. But there's something really interesting here, Eric. The 2027 deadline that was originally 2025 isn't for all ECC customers. It's only for the ones on the latest enhancement packs, enhancement packs 6, 7, and 8, and 8 was the last one that was delivered. If you're on enhancement pack 1 to 5, or what was prior to that, we call it enhancement pack 0, but basically, the first release of ECC 6. So if you're on enhancement pack 0 to 5, your end of mainstream support date is still 2025.
Oh, wow.
Check your calendar.
Yeah.
That's like 14 months away.
It's coming up real soon. Yeah.
It is coming up real soon. And by estimates that we have, there's about 50% of the ECC customer base that is on enhancement pack 0 to 5. So they're facing this 2025 deadline, and SAP hasn't said that there's even an extended support option for them. Their option is called customer specific maintenance, and that's a whole different negotiation and a lower scope and a lower set of SLAs from SAP. And so they're really facing what's going to happen. So as you can imagine, right, we have lots more potential customers out there that are looking for an option to extend and go beyond that 2025 deadline. I mean, if you were just to try to start a migration right now for your SAP property, that would be a high risk kind of a project, because very few of them are going to be just months. Yeah. And I don't imagine that too many of those clients running EHP 0 to 5 are going to bother upgrading to EHP 6 to 8. Don't know that there's a whole lot in that for them. Plus, all they're doing is kicking the can down the road, and they're going to face a 2027 deadline anyway.
Right.
So that has put pressure on them. The other thing that's put pressure on them is the next big move is, as you say, to go to S/4HANA. And the way that SAP is selling that now is really only in a cloud subscription. So you're talking about taking this property that you paid, remember our example at the beginning, you paid $5 million for, and you own the licenses. And what SAP is saying is if you want to do S/4HANA through the Rise with SAP program, that you will give up those perpetual licenses, and instead you will pay a subscription for the right to run that software and the support that comes with it. Right. And those numbers are huge when you add up the cost of the migration and the disruption and the risk to do that migration to S/4HANA. There's one other constituency I want to talk about, and that is about 18,000 existing S/4HANA clients that took on S/4HANA early. So, when S/4HANA was first delivered, I think it was 2015, not sure. There were clients who said, okay, I'm going to go to that technology, and they implemented it, typically what we would call on-premises. They kept their perpetual licenses. They implemented on-premises. We're talking about thousands and thousands of clients. And SAP has even said to them, we really want you to move to Rise with SAP and our managed cloud and a subscription. And so some of the things that we're doing, the really cool things that we're doing in their mind with new features, including some AI capabilities, some Gen AI capabilities, some sustainability things. They call it Green Ledger. Those enhancements are not going to be made available to those running on-prem. So these clients who said, hey, we're with you, SAP, we're going to go to S/4HANA, they still have perpetual licenses, they're running on-premises. We have a lot of those as clients.
Interesting.
Why? Because of our model for support. And we can, support them. What we say is once you come to Rimini Street, we'll support whatever you're running for 15 years.
Right.
And so there's no concern about 2025, 2027 deadlines. They can take their time to decide what they're going to do next. Maybe that'll be S4HANA, maybe not. Maybe by then it'll be something completely different. But we take that time pressure off. We buy them several years of savings that they can then invest in a migration project if they want. And so that's what's really happened in the market with the deadlines and the high-end premium features are only for those on the Rise with SAP program. It's got a lot of buyers pushing back and saying, I'm not sure that's for us. What we've got is so mature, so customized, so stable. I'm not sure we want to do that thing that you're basically forcing me to do by stopping mainstream maintenance and potentially ending my perpetual license. And so here's an opportunity for us to step in and say, no, it's your roadmap. Control it. You decide what you want to do. We'll be there alongside you, and we'll support the customizations, and you can run it, until it's time to do something else.
Yeah, and even if you do have a little bit of FOMO, like you mentioned before, and I love that topic or that theme of, let's not get too enamored by FOMO, and let's not make irrational decisions based on FOMO. But let's just say I've got a little bit of FOMO, and I still think, all right, well, I still feel a little nervous that SAP or, insert vendor name here is forcing me over to a newer version of the technology. That's okay. Yeah, I mean, you can still go down that path, but it may be that 2027 is not a realistic timeline to get it done. So this gives you some time to say, well, if it's going to take you till 2028 or 29 or whatever it is, at least now you've got some temporary relief to give you some additional wiggle room or runway to get that done.
Yeah, 100%. So I truly believe that our engagements and discussions with SAP practitioners, it's already increasing. I was looking at the kinds of volume we've seen in those increasing, and I would expect that to increase right through 2027. I think next year is going to be, there's going to be several who are just caught out and are still facing a 2025 deadline and just have no runway left. And so we're here to help.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's an interesting question that maybe opens up another complete different thread here with you, Scott, but this is from Sam on LinkedIn. He says, are there enough experienced S4HANA consultants out there to hit a 2025 deadline anyway? And just in general, how are you seeing this whole resource constraint thing affect the market, and how's it affecting your business?
Yeah, short answer to that is no, there aren't enough. Right. And I follow this closely. In fact, we'll be publishing a video podcast on this exact topic, the SAP talent gap and how it's changed this year versus last year. Even the large SIs are recruiting very, very hard for SAP consultants. It's a good time to be an SAP consultant. If I go back in my own history, right? 1999 was a good time to be a COBOL programmer because of Y2K, right? And they were in short supply. Here's the challenge. So anyone who's going to do an ECC to S4HANA migration is going to need people who are familiar with ECC and familiar with S4HANA to make that jump. And that's a very special skill set. And by the way, those people with S4HANA skills are charging a premium. Anywhere from 10 to 20% is what we're hearing that they are expecting for having those SAP S4HANA skills. So any practitioner or customer that wants to do this migration is going to have to attract that talent, recruit, and then afford that talent, which is going to cost more, and then retain that talent through the end of the project. I kind of envision this nightmare scenario where you've got some really highly skilled SAP consultants that started your, let's call it an 18-month project. And 12, 15 months in, there's a desperate company out there that's willing to pay anything and will come and poach and find and hire those consultants who are on your project with an offer they just can't refuse. And so this challenge of finding, attracting, affording, and retaining talent through the end of that migration effort, I think, is going to be tough. It's just one more reason that don't do it now. I mean, none of us could avoid Y2K. It was going to happen to all of us.
Right.
But 2027 support deadline doesn't have to happen to anybody.
Yeah. It almost feels like, it's funny you bring up Y2K, because I've always said it kind of feels like when I say we, I'm not talking about you and I, but we as an industry, as a collective industry, we've created and manufactured our newest version of Y2K. Let's create this urgency that we naturally inherently had in the market back in the late 90s. Let's recreate that. Let's replicate that frenzied panic that so many organizations had. Now the vendors are manufacturing it rather than it being more of a technical situation. Right. Although I still do wonder that the cynic conspiracy theorist in me still wonders if Y2K was really a thing. Now I'm wondering.
That's a different podcast altogether, Eric.
Was that really a thing? Did we really need all of this panic back then? But that's all. You're right. That is another topic. That would be a fun one, though, to do sometime. So here's a couple comments and questions following up here. We've clearly hit a nerve here on this thread, but this is from Gassan on LinkedIn. He says SAP certifications are on the rise faster than Bitcoin. That's probably true. You're starting to see a lot of people jump into the space, which leads you to wonder, are these qualified resources? Are these the kind of resources you want? The ones that just jump in and get certified right now? Is that who you want to kind of guide you through your transformation?
That's part of the vetting process. I mean, certification is important, and there's training out there. And I've even seen SAP, increase the level of training available. But there is so much more to a project than just being certified on the software.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm here with Scott Hayes from Rimini Street. We're talking about third-party maintenance and support options. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
My name is Eric Kimberling, and I'm the CEO and founder of Third Stage Consulting. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to invite you to learn a little bit more about Third Stage Consulting, who we are and what we do. I've included a link to a video right here that describes Third Stage in a bit more detail. It talks about our story, our history, our philosophy, our clients, our service offerings, and that sort of thing. But in general, what Third Stage Consulting does is we're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting provider. We help clients through their entire digital transformation life cycles, beginning with digital strategy, software evaluation and selection, all the way through and including implementation planning, implementation readiness, and the actual implementation itself. We're technology agnostic, so we only represent our clients' best interests. We do not represent software vendors. But having said that, we work very closely with software vendors, all the leading players that you can imagine we've worked with, both in helping clients evaluate and select them, but also in helping clients implement those solutions as well. So we have a very broad, objective, agnostic view of the market that is meant to really represent your interest as you go through your digital transformation. I also encourage you to scan this QR code right here to get access to our resource center. This resource center has a ton of information, a ton of ebooks that are free. You have access to top 10 software rankings, playbooks for how to make your project more successful, guides to change management, YouTube videos, all kinds of stuff that are going to help you through your digital transformation. So I encourage you to scan this QR code to get access to those resources. And please feel free to reach out to me directly to brainstorm ideas about your project. Even if it's just informally, you want to bounce around some ideas and get some informal advice, I'd be happy to spend some time with you. So feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. You can also find it in the description field of this video as well.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 194. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. And this podcast every week covers all the things related to the tech-agnostic view of digital transformation, including the people, process, technology, and strategy sides of change. So thanks for being here today. We're in the midst of a conversation with Scott Hayes from Rimini Street. We're talking about third-party maintenance and support. And then Laik on LinkedIn has a controversial statement here that I enjoy and I actually agree with. So, Laik says, good point about on-prem S4HANA users. These clients feel betrayed and SAP hasn't figured out how to motivate them to move to the cloud. with this cloud first strategy, SAP risked losing them entirely, as some of these clients may never want to go to the cloud. And God forbid someone doesn't want to go to the cloud and they don't want to do it now. I know that's just not cool to talk about, but how much of the market do you see is being like, hey, this cloud thing, it's great. That's where we're going, but we're not quite ready. We don't see ourselves doing that anytime soon. So let's look to third-party maintenance and support. How often is that sort of a driver for this model?
Oh, it's very often a driver for our model. We've often used the phrase lean into a business-driven roadmap as opposed to a vendor-dictated roadmap, right? Control your roadmap, own your future. You decide. This is great software. It's really phenomenal software. And as I said, it's likely doing the job. I mean, we kidded about it yesterday in our communications, Eric, about this idea of legacy software. And I said, no. It's not legacy if you're still running it, using it, and it's still productive for your business. It's existing software. And you can keep doing that for years and years. And we encourage our clients to look at what the business really needs. Sometimes there are line of business influencers in the company that are in marketing, in sales, and they say, I need a new CRM solution. There are practitioners in human resources that say, I can't live with what's in this stack of ERP solutions. I need a purpose-built human capital management solution. So that's already happened. People have separated those core business functions out from this monolithic stack of ERP and are putting together more of a composable model. Now, getting back to the cloud issue, there are some who I sometimes hear, we will never go to the cloud for reason XYZ.
Sure.
And what I want to separate here is the deployment from the licensing, because they don't always mean, they aren't always hand in hand. People will often talk about, I don't want to go to the cloud. What they really mean is, I don't want to give up my perpetual licenses and go to subscription.
Right?
That's a separate thing. We have clients who have moved their implementation of their ERP to the cloud. We call it a lift and shift project. You don't want to be in the data center business. I get that. But that doesn't mean you have to give up your perpetual license and move to subscription. No, bring your perpetual licenses with you and redeploy your existing software on AWS, on Azure, on Google. We can help you do that. So now your cloud, I'm out of the data center business. I've got that elastic cloud computing available to me that's going to be a longer runway and a more predictable cost for me in the cloud, but I'm retaining my perpetual licenses. And so many customers will get to the cloud without changing their commercial relationship with the vendor and the software.
Interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. And I'd never really thought of that. I've always known of the financial implications, obviously, of moving from the perpetual model to subscription model, but I never thought of that necessarily being a form of resistance to the cloud. And it makes total sense. Obviously, that has to be a key driver why companies are resisting the cloud in some ways. And I think a lot of times when we talk about that, we think, well, it's because they just aren't digitally mature enough or technically mature enough or sophisticated enough to move to the cloud. But it could just be purely a financial consideration too, which you have to take into account. Just because it's better for the vendors and they make more money off it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right strategy for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So here's a question I want to get to on YouTube. Where was it? Well, first of all, I'll get to this comment. This is from Anthony on LinkedIn. Anthony says, it's a similar challenge with Oracle. Cloud is much more expensive than staying with stable legacy ERP platforms. I think that's true. Cloud systems can cost you more in the long term, much like leasing a car generally is going to cost you more than buying a car.
Great example.
What about, here's an interesting question. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. This is from Manny on YouTube. Manny says, do you see the imminent upgrade to HANA as an opportunity for customers to explore alternative solutions in the market? So these companies that are using the existing SAP systems, whether it's ECC, R3, or maybe the on-premises version of S/4HANA, do you see, how many of those customers do you see saying, hey, if you're going to force us to a migration here, let's just go out and look at Oracle. Let's go look at Microsoft Dynamics and let's go consider our options rather than just going down this sort of forced march of we have to do an upgrade to SAP to another SAP product?
Yeah. I think there's some of that going on. I think that that's going to be on the longer tail, the smaller group that will actually choose to do something else, except for those that I say come to a third-party support solution to buy themselves some time. And with that time, I think they'll have an opportunity to truly explore what those other options are. I don't think we're going to see this, quick switch of customers from SAP or Oracle EBS to an Infor or a Dynamics or an Epicor during this next couple of years. It's too massive of a change. Look, initially SaaS was created for kind of departmental function-specific applications, things that were really easy to deploy. And you just kind of, I need this for a small group of people, 10 users, and I put in my credit card and I use it for a year. And if I have to change, I'll change. There were low barriers to entry, right? Low cost to implementation, and there were low barriers to exit. I could just stop paying, get out and do another one. That's not true for ERP software. That is humongous and it's complex. There are enormous barriers to entry or re-entry. There are enormous barriers to exit, particularly with properties as large and as complex and as customized as SAP and Oracle ERP solutions. So when you say, well, could we make that switch? Yeah, it's going to take some time, and you're really going to have to do some very hard evaluation of the capabilities of that relative to what you have, so that your business doesn't take a step backwards when it's making a switch like that. But it can happen, and we want to invite customers, as I say, it's your roadmap, you control it, you make the decisions, just don't be forced into it by some artificial time boundary.
Yeah. And like you said earlier, control, I can't remember your exact words, but you say control your business or control your roadmap. I mean, it's your business. Decide what you need to decide that fits your business, not necessarily the vendor's business and needs.
Yeah.
What about, here's a question from Darian on LinkedIn, which I love this question. Can you share any success stories where companies were able to delay or avoid costly ERP upgrades by using Rimini Street's services?
Yeah, I mean, it happens, every month because they did come here to do exactly that. And so we have clients who, for example, there's one in Europe called Green Cargo. And the CIO there is a gentleman by the name of Ingo Paas. And he sat down, when he joined the company, he sat down with his CEO, and they had quite a rich array of not only SAP systems, but also other, even mainframe systems that were running their business. And the general thought was, we just do whatever the vendor does next. That was the kind of the thinking of the CEO. And he sat down and he said, no, I think we need to think about this differently. I think we have to understand exactly what's going to make a difference for our business, for our unique model of sustainable transportation. They have rails in Europe that transport goods. And we need to isolate specific capabilities that need to be addressed, that just staying on the SAP version train isn't necessarily going to get us. And so it's what some people will call a composable ERP. Let me make sure that each part of my business has the software that's right for their part of the business. Now, back 20 years ago, that would have been tremendously difficult to operate because there wasn't this kind of capability to stitch together and do the integration between applications that were running in different languages, different processes, different kinds of server software. But now we have the ability to expose microservices from one application to another. We have great orchestration software tools that are available to make applications and data talk to one another. And in fact, Ingo Paas wrote this book called Digital Composable Enterprises, right? And so it's all about it starts with his conversation with the CEO about, let's do what's important to the business, not necessarily just do what the vendor wants us to do. And that's where it begins, is that conversation with the C-suite And he made that convincing argument and has developed a team now that's using low code, no code solutions. They're exploring AI, and they're doing things that are important to the business. So that's a really good example. But we can turn to several of our clients who have taken that savings and invested in new things that make a difference for their business. And more of them, we're hearing stories like a company in Japan called Nexon that has delivered some new AI capabilities to their users, basically self-funded from their existing budget with the money they've saved with Rimini Street.
That's great. That's smart use of financial resources and redirecting capital elsewhere and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
So for companies that are on the fence, or maybe they haven't heard of third-party support options, they're not familiar with the model, perhaps this is the first time they're hearing about it, is just through this discussion, which is still true. I still
It's possible. I'm doing my best, Eric.
There's still people out there that don't know this whole model exists, that Rimini Street exists, believe it or not. But let's just say we're kind of new to this idea. Let's just say we've got some people here that might be on the fence about this third-party support options. What advice would you give to sort of get started, as far as just understanding what my options are in terms of how I continue to get maintenance and support for my existing systems?
Well, it's important to look at your current agreements with the vendor. You want to make sure that you're not misusing the software, that you haven't maybe inadvertently started to use more than your licenses would allow you to use. And so that's just an assessment of your existing agreement, your licenses, and your usage. We can help you with that. Actually, part of our practice is a whole organization called Global License Advisory Services. And so we can help you take a look at that and make sure that everything's looking good. And then take a look at your roadmap and talk to your business lead. It's important for you 12 months from now, 24, 60 months from now, 5 years. And then look at what the vendor's offering. Now, your first thought might be, oh, look at all those cool new features. Surely there's stuff in there for us. Yeah, maybe not. Let's really look closely and then do the mapping of the capabilities that the vendor's offering to what your business leaders said that you need. But then there's a huge step in between, because getting from here to there can be extremely expensive, risky, and disruptive. And doing it at this time, if you're SAP trying to find the right, that migration itself could cost several times that initial $5 million investment, right?
Right.
And then the final piece of analysis to do is to look at the ongoing cloud costs. You talk about changing from owning a car to leasing it. The ongoing cloud costs are never going to stop. And in fact, and think about it, with AI in the background, there's a great possibility that your consumption of compute power and storage is going to escalate tremendously. Now, maybe there's a productivity component that gives you a bit of an ROI on that, but do the math carefully, because you're no longer in control of those future costs. This is another blog post I just published called From TCO to TCC. So TCO, total cost of ownership. If you're no longer an owner, then do you have control over that? So TCC is total cost control, and that's by the vendor who is running your software, publishes your software, has the subscription license, maybe intermediating the hyperscaler agreement in the case of SAP in their RISE program. There's total cost control by the vendor, and there's no rent control in the land of ERP, right? So those future costs, you better build in a model that looks at the possibility that could go up year after year.
Yeah, that makes total sense. That was going to be my closing question, because that's a great place to leave it. But I have to ask this bonus question because it's such a good one that came in on LinkedIn. And I think it's worth clarifying as sort of a piggyback to what you were just talking about looking at your options and understanding what your needs and considerations are and what your options are. So this is from Gagan on LinkedIn. Gagan says, can Rimini Street support hybrid environments where some parts of the landscape are still on the older version and others are on the newer version of the ERP?
Yeah. Thanks, Gagan. Good to see you. We are vendor agnostic, technology agnostic, deployment agnostic. So however you've licensed it, and however you've deployed it, we can help take care of it. I'll get into one nuance of that before we end, but so if you choose to run on-prem, literally on your own premises, fine. If you choose to migrate it, lift and shift to a cloud, fine. We can still support it. This is where that question of how are you licensed? Have you paid for the perpetual licenses, and are you paying annual support from the vendor? If that's the case, we can take over that annual support. You don't have to pay the vendor anymore, pay us less, and we'll take care of you. If you've moved a portion of that software, not just to the cloud, but to a subscription arrangement where you're now paying a single subscription fee to the vendor that includes the right to use the software and the support for that software, you're probably not going to want to pay twice for support. I get that. So we have a whole part of our business, a whole practice called managed services, where if you are running a subscription property, and we already do this today for SAP cloud solutions like SuccessFactors and Ariba and Concur and IBP, and Salesforce, right? Kind of the inventor of that whole model. We provide managed services for the day-to-day operations and performance and configuration and security and all of the other aspects of that that need to be done. It's just not actually, doing the break-fix support for the software itself. So that's another service that we offer. And we have clients who have both. We call them Rimini One clients. They have both support from us and they have managed services from us. And some of their deployment is on-prem and some of it's cloud. So it's hybrid, not a problem. We're agnostic to that. And we'll provide whatever services we can to help you get the most out of that software.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's, you're right. Every customer is different, has different technical landscape and architecture that they're using, that sort of thing. So I imagine you're used to seeing a lot of different variations of that technical stack that you can support.
Yeah, 5,600 variations.
Yeah, that's a lot. Now, how do we learn more about Rimini Street? What are the best places to go to learn more about you guys and to connect with you personally?
Yeah. Obviously, our website, riministreet.com. And one of the things to explore there first might be our client success stories. We have hundreds of them available, and they're available there on the website. And it's generally organized by the different services we offer and the products we support. So that's a great place to start. I'm available on LinkedIn. Scott Hayes, Hays, can be reached there. And so I'm happy to engage. And I have been engaging on LinkedIn with quite a bit of at least the SAP community.
Good deal. Well, thanks for being here today, Scott. Really appreciate it. This is an interesting topic. It's fascinating to see what options are out there for customers, especially in this area. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure, Eric. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Great conversation. Appreciate having you on the show, and thank you to the audience for the great questions. We've got a lot more to cover and a lot of questions we didn't get to here in the conversation, so we're going to follow up with some of those threads here in just a moment. We're also going to get into Tom Brady's lessons for digital transformation here in just a moment, so stick around. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you'll want to download the Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, They create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So, collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 194. My name is Eric Kimberling. This is the podcast that has everything to do with digital transformation. It's a tech-agnostic view of strategy, people, process, and technology. And I'm here with Darian Chwialkowski. And Darian, we just had Scott Hayes on the show talking about third-party support and maintenance options for existing ERP systems. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from the conversation?
Yeah, I think first of all, I just loved hearing his background being a buyer at Macy's, and then that's how he got into IT. I think that's a very interesting story.
Yeah.
Like you said, nobody that you really interview is saying that they were 5 years old dreaming of being in the ERP technology space, but it is cool to see how different people got into it. So I think that was a really interesting story for Scott. But one of the other things I want to talk about is how he talked about how he actually, or third party can actually save companies money when moving to the cloud from different strategies. So I was wondering if you have any client examples that you could share of when, either just a third party option saved clients money and it was a better option for them, or that it was just a better fit than one of the main vendors, I guess, that we see.
Yeah, it's funny you asked that, because just late last week I had a call with a client of ours that we'd done some work for. They're a big manufacturing company, and they're based in the U.S. in Wisconsin. And the CFO called after I had met with the CIO, the COO, and and I met with the CEO and CFO as well. But the CFO called me after this meeting we had a few weeks ago, where we were kind of going over the options, and they're a legacy SAP customer, so they're using an older version of SAP, and they were getting ready to start this S/4HANA implementation because of the 2027 deadline. And we helped them go through and assess whether or not S/4HANA was the right fit, and it probably is the right fit, to be honest. But the question that we struggled with and that they were struggling with is, where's the business value? Can we justify this project other than the fact that SAP is saying we have till 2027 to do it? And my recommendation to the CFO is I would absolutely not do it, based on what I know about you. And part of it is because they had heavily customized their legacy or their existing version or instance of SAP. So it was tailored to what they want and what they consider to be their sort of competitive advantage. And the system's working for them. They actually have no problems with it. They really like the version of SAP they're on. And so he called and said, well, I'm just not seeing why we would do this. And they're in the process of opening a new factory. They've got some other big capital investments they're making at the same time. And then my recommendation was I wouldn't do it. Based on everything I said, there's no reason why you would. I would just focus on getting more out of your current system, getting as much mileage as you can out of it, maybe enhancing it or incrementally improving it over time, but then recognizing that someday you will have to switch it. It just may not be the next 1 or 2 or 3 years. And so that's where they're at. And that's where we left it with them is, let's focus on optimizing what you've got rather than going through a big, massive tens of millions of dollar sort of implementation. And that's where they landed. So that's one example.
Yeah, that makes sense. And with that example, one thing that kind of sparks in my mind is when customers get left on this on-premise, and let's say it's 2027 and SAP is no longer supporting it, how can they continue to upgrade it? I know you kind of mentioned that or optimize the system. What are some different examples of how companies can do that still, even though it's not supported by SAP? I know you can go to a third party, but can you still add to the system, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, you can. It's just not going to come from SAP. So in other words, SAP is not going to give you, after that deadline, SAP is not going to give you enhancements. And in fact, they're already sort of slowing down the level of innovation and the pace of enhancements now, because more and more of their innovation and R&D budget is going to S/4HANA, not the existing systems. So we're talking about SAP here, but the same model applies to a lot of the big ERP software vendors, especially the ones that started off on-prem and have moved to the cloud. I'm not talking about like the NetSuites and the Salesforces of the world necessarily, because those are legacy cloud providers. They've always been in the cloud. So set those guys aside for a minute. This is more related to the legacy on-premise providers. So yeah, that's really where we're at in the market and what we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. It was a great conversation. Great to learn about third party, especially with all the deadlines coming up, and give companies more options that maybe they didn't know were out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, is you want to be objective and get independent tech agnostic advice on what your options are. And you want to know that whatever recommendation you're getting isn't influenced by self-interest. And that's the key thing is, if you go to a third party support and maintenance provider, they're going to give you an answer that obviously puts themselves in the best position or the best perceived light. If you go to a software vendor and say, hey, what do you think? Should I move to the cloud? You're going to hear a resounding yes, absolutely you should. And here's why. So it's important to just really look at it objectively and look to companies like ours at Third Stage that can provide that tech agnostic, independent view of what's rational, what's objective, what makes the most sense with your business, and what are your true options. Because I think that's where a lot of companies get stuck. So good stuff there. But well, good. Well, we're going to shift gears now, completely shift gears. And we're going to talk about American football and Tom Brady. And we're going to talk about Tom Brady's lessons and leadership as it relates to digital transformation. So we're going to dive into that here in just a moment. But first, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Interested in working for a company that truly values your unique skills and experience? Here at Third Stage, we don't hire based on resumes alone. We look at the full candidate, experience, and willingness to provide excellent service for our clients. Within a technology, independent, and agnostic consulting firm, you have the opportunity to learn across industries with a diverse group of clients. Our consultants also have the opportunity to diversify their portfolio and learn across technology systems. If you're interested in joining a high-growth entrepreneurial organization, please reach out to us at work@thirdstage-consulting.com.
People oftentimes ask me how I built such a strong social media following on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook and other outlets. And the fact of the matter is it took me a long time to build a following through a lot of trial and error, making a lot of mistakes. Had I known that there were companies out there that could help me build my brand, I would have done that a long time ago. I didn't know that, but the good news is that there is today a consulting firm that will help you through building your own personal brand through some of their training programs. The company is called Roloff Consulting, and if you're familiar with Emma Roloff, she's someone that I've had on this podcast before, and she's well known in the digital transformation space as well as the sales space, and she's big on TikTok, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And she and her husband have started a training course and a training company that focuses on helping people build their personal brands and helping them to sell themselves digitally. So whether you're a salesperson that's trying to reach more customers or you're an individual that's just trying to build your personal brand, that's something that they help with through their training programs. And they've offered listeners of this podcast a free 5-day LinkedIn challenge. And I encourage you to check it out. I've included a link below for this podcast. If you go to the podcast notes, you'll find a link that gets you free access to this 5-day challenge where you'll get step-by-step guidance. You'll get real results. So you'll get some tangible results from the program. And you also get a special offer at the end of it. So it's exclusive to listeners of this podcast. Be sure to check out the link below if you want to work on building your personal brand, or if you're in sales and you're trying to reach more people. Whatever the case may be, check it out. It's free to listeners of this podcast. You can check it out via the link below.
Don't get me wrong.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 194. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. And the show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, produced by Major Tom Productions. Thanks for being here today. So we've got this YouTube video we recently published about Tom Brady. And first of all, I have to say I'm not supposed to be a Tom Brady fan because Darian, you and I live in Denver. As you know, I've lived in Denver most of my life, or I've lived in Colorado most of my life. And I'm a huge Denver Broncos fan, which is the local American football team that I support. John Elway, if anyone remembers him, John Elway was a big quarterback here. Peyton Manning, we've won a few Super Bowls. So I love the Denver Broncos. One of the Denver Broncos rivals over time was Tom Brady and the New England Patriots. So I'm not supposed to like him, but now that he's retired and I don't have to worry about him as a Broncos fan anymore, I can actually appreciate him a little bit more as a football player, but also as a leader. He's actually doing a lot in the world of business. And he and a co-author from Harvard Business School recently published an article in Harvard Business Review about some of the lessons he had from being on these Super Bowl championship winning teams and leadership lessons that apply to business. And I thought it was super interesting. And I thought a lot of the lessons that they talk about in this article are relevant to digital transformations. If you're leading a digital transformation, or you're part of a transformation team, or if you're part of a change management team that's trying to get leaders to come along and get on board with it, you'll want to hear this, because this is a really interesting article that I dive into in this video. And I just talk about some of the lessons that Tom Brady espouses in that article. So with that being said, let's roll this clip and then we'll come back and talk about it.
We are often looking for those leadership lessons that we can apply to make our change initiatives more successful. And it turns out that Tom Brady is a great source for leadership guidance. Love him or hate him, doesn't matter. He's one of the greatest American football players ever to play the game. If you don't know, he was the quarterback for the New England Patriots for a long time, and he ended his career in Tampa Bay. He went to 10 Super Bowls and won 7 of them, so that's just a ridiculous level of performance that most athletes never come close to achieving. Now, as a Denver Broncos fan, I shouldn't like Tom Brady. He was a big rival to my home team, Denver Broncos, but you can't deny the fact that he's been very successful in his career, and there's some great lessons that we can apply to our own business transformation initiatives. In fact, he recently co-wrote an article in the August-September 2024 issue of Harvard Business Review. He co-wrote this article to talk about some of the leadership lessons that he took away from football, and that's what I want to talk about here today. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to share a little bit of information about Third Stage Consulting and who we are. Third Stage Consulting Group is an independent, technology-agnostic provider of consulting services to help clients through their digital transformations. We help with digital strategy and software selection, as well as implementation planning. And during implementation, we provide services related to program management, organizational change, business process improvement, as well as enterprise architecture. These are just some of the services we provide. We have offices in North America as well as Europe and Asia Pacific. So if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to check out our resource center, which includes a number of resources that will help you through your digital transformation. And you can access that for free using the QR code here or the links below. You can also reach out to me directly if you'd like to discuss your digital transformation and brainstorm ideas on how to improve where you're headed on your journey. Now let's jump back into today's content. One of the things that Tom Brady shares in his article in Harvard Business Review about leadership lessons is that he would always put the team first, and his most successful teams put the team first. They had some very high caliber players on some of these Super Bowl championship teams that he played on, including himself and other wide receivers and star players that he played with throughout the years. But he said that they were the most successful when they focused on the team first and they didn't let their own individual egos get in the way. And just to add some additional context, Tom Brady actually wasn't very good, or at least wasn't as good as a lot of players when he played in college. He was a backup quarterback for the first few years of his career, and it wasn't until late in his career that he got the opportunity to start a quarterback. And he talked about how during that time he had to work extra hard to be relevant and to put the team first. And it would have been easy for him to take a hit to his ego or to be upset about the fact that he wasn't playing. But he ultimately, and other players on that University of Michigan team that he played for, would ultimately put the team first, and that's what made them successful and allowed them to win championships at the college level. Now, just a fun little fact, I mentioned that I'm a Denver Broncos fan, and I'm not supposed to like Tom Brady. The person that was actually playing ahead of Tom Brady was a quarterback named Brian Greasy, who ended up going on to play for the Denver Broncos for a few years. However, he was not nearly as successful as Tom Brady was. But the fact of the matter here is that Tom Brady had this mentality, and his teams had the mentality that the team had to come first. And the way this relates to business transformations is that you have to think less about yourself and your own individual department and your own individual politics, and think about what does the organization need as a whole. And that's easier said than done, because oftentimes change involves threat. There's risk involved with any time we go through a change. So it can be easy to sort of turn inward and focus our own individual needs. But the organizations that are most successful and the leaders that are most successful have a way of getting their people to focus more on the overall team, the overall organization, rather than their own individual needs. Another lesson that Tom Brady provides in terms of leadership lessons and success is to show appreciation for the unsung colleagues within your organization. Tom Brady, in the article in Harvard Business Review, talks about how he would oftentimes incentivize his offensive line. And for those that don't follow football, the offensive line is the group of people that stand in front of the quarterback and they block the defenders from coming to get the quarterback. So when the quarterback drops back to pass, they're the people that have to protect the quarterback. Now, usually these offensive linemen are not big name, high paid people, and usually they're not the star players. And so what Tom Brady did is he would give them an incentive that any time, for example, they threw a screen pass and the blockers allowed them to get at least 15 yards on a screen pass, he would give them each $1,000 out of his own pocket. And that's not a lot of money if you're a professional football player. It's a lot of money for most of us, but not for a professional football player. But it was a way to recognize the offensive line and some of the unsung colleagues on his team. Now, shifting gears to look at our own business transformation and our business change initiatives, we have to think about the people on the front lines that maybe aren't high up in the organization, or maybe they're not well known, but they know a lot about the organization, or they're really open to change, or they're good change agents that can help us drive further change through the organization. And the more we involve and recognize these people and make them part of the change, the more successful we're going to be. And these unsung heroes may not be the executives or even the mid-level management. It may be the frontline people. And the more we involve them, the more we're going to get more people on our side, and the more we're going to get our team functioning as a high-performing team that's going to be much more successful in our change initiatives than those that don't do that. Another lesson from Tom Brady that he outlines in his article is that he and his teammates would set a standard of high performance. In fact, in the article, he talks about how he and his teammates oftentimes would have a competition. Who could get to the weight room first? Who could watch the most film? Who is out on the field first thing in the morning practicing first? And so he was always challenging each other to be better and to do beyond what the coaches were asking them to do. And if we apply that same lesson to our business transformations, this is a really important one, because I would argue that most of the technology industry and outside consultants in many cases are encouraging you not to be high performance. And what I mean by that is, if you think about a digital technology initiative where we're deploying new technologies, you've got software vendors that just want you to slam in technologies and just go live. And what you can do as a team member to set a higher standard and to demand higher performance from your organization is to say, hey, why don't we spend more time testing? Why don't we spend more time refining our business requirements or refining what we want our future state business processes to look like? And I'm not saying that you want to slow the project down and you don't want to overanalyze things, but there's a certain amount of things that don't typically get done well during a project. And something you can do as a team member is ensure that you focus on those non-technological things that are going to make your transformation more successful than those that just focus myopically on one part of a transformation, like a technology initiative. So demanding higher performance, that's one of the lessons from Tom Brady that we can apply to our own business change initiatives. Another one of Tom Brady's leadership lessons is to recognize what motivates people and recognize that different people are motivated by different things. He talks in his article about, through his career, he found that different people wanted different things and different things motivated people differently. So some players, for example, respond really well to being beat up in practice, not literally, but more verbally, and being pushed and being held accountable. Other people are motivated by encouragement. Other people are motivated by their own stats or winning and losing or winning a championship. So there's a lot of different things that motivate different players in athletics. But in a business situation, we've got to understand the same thing. What motivates people? What's going to motivate our project team, for example, to do this well and to work the extra hours required to make the project successful? Is it money? Is it recognition? Is it the opportunity for promotion? Is it long-term job security and stability? Is it the fact that they're going to be more important to the organization going forward? We've got to understand that, and we've got to understand that each person is probably going to have a different motive. If we look beyond the project team down to the frontline employees, we've got to figure out what motivates them. What's going to make them want to be part of this change? Is it involvement? Is it listening to their ideas? Is it paying them more? Is it painting a vision of the future of how they might be more successful in their roles? we've got to figure out what motivates people in our organization and build that into our change plan as we go through any sort of business transformation or change initiative. And so understanding what motivates people and executing on that and having a deliberate strategy behind that is something that's very important to lead change effectively. In his Harvard Business Review article, Tom Brady also talks about how he would augment the leadership style of the coaches that he played for. So the main coach that he played for most of his career was someone named Bill Belichick, who was the head coach of the New England Patriots. And he's the coach that coached Tom Brady and his teams to the 7 Super Bowl championships. One thing that Tom talks about in his article is how Bill Belichick was a little bit aloof. He wouldn't get close to the players. He wouldn't build a personal relationship, partially because he wanted to remain objective, knowing that someday he might have to cut that player, he might have to trade them, or he might have to not renew their contract or pay them what they wanted to be paid. So Tom Brady recognized this. He didn't try to change the behavior of his coach, but what he did instead is try to fill in the gap and try to complement what Belichick did. So Tom took it upon himself to build the relationships and the personal connections with his teammates and his players. Now, the same could be said for a business transformation or a business change initiative. You have to do the change, not just to change in general, but do it in the context of what your leadership style is as an organization. If you have a very autocratic and top-down hierarchical leadership style, doesn't mean it's good or bad. It just means you've got to figure out how you're going to lead the change in that context. If you're a very flat organization, very democratic and very collaborative, you're going to lead the project a little bit different. And so you've got to figure out your style of not only the leadership in the leadership styles, but also where the leaders want to take the organization. And you've got to augment and piggyback on where the leaders want to take the organization. That's why it's so important to keep that alignment and stay connected with the leadership team and not go off in a tangent off on your own or in a silo, going through a transformation without linking it back to the overall leadership style and the leadership strategy. In the Harvard Business Review article, Tom Brady also talks about how he and other teammates would oftentimes have to counteract external forces. And what he means by this is when we think back to the point I made earlier about how Tom and his teammates would always put the team first, he talked about how oftentimes the media, friends, family members of individual players would put pressure on the individual players to increase and improve their stats. So in other words, you might get family members, they would ask questions about why didn't you play more? Why didn't you have more catches? Or why aren't your stats what they were last year? You also had the agents that represent the individual athletes who would do the same thing. They would say, you need to increase your stats, your individual performance, so we can get you a better deal. And so there's always this pressure to focus on individual performance rather than team performance. And so Tom talked about how the most effective teams he played on would find a way to counteract and mitigate those outside forces. And when we think about business transformation, there's a ton of outside forces that impact and potentially undermine your change initiative. Think about the frontline employees that don't want to change, or the people that are stuck in their old ways. They've been with the organization for 20, 30 years and they have no desire to change. Those people are going to put pressure on the people that might otherwise be excited about the change, and it starts to wear them down over time. So we as leaders have to figure out how to counteract that through change management, resistance to change tactics, and other things. And if you'd like to learn more, by the way, about how to do that from a change management perspective, you can download this white paper right here. It's a guide to change management. It talks about all the different tactics and strategies you can use to effectively manage change within your organization. Now, Tom Brady obviously didn't work much in an office. He worked out on a football field, much like the one I'm standing in front of here. But he does have a lesson for those of us that do work in an office, which is it's important to get out of the office and get out of your comfort zone physically to build connections with your team and to build a higher performing team. He talked about how oftentimes he would invite teammates over to his house, or he'd take them to dinner, go on golf outings, and do things that were completely unrelated to football just to build camaraderie and to build a personal connection that translated to higher performance on the field. So he talked often about how the relationship and the chemistry that the teammates had, that's what propelled them to be so much better than other teams they played. And if you think of this too much as a business and just a initiative we've got to get through, and we've got our Gantt chart that we've got to check all these things off a list, and we lose that personal connection with our teammates and with our other employees that work with us, we're going to lose sight of what's important and we're not going to succeed. So in a business transformation, it's important to get outside of our little war room that we might be operating in as we design and build new processes and new technologies, and we design what the organization is going to look like. We have to connect with the people. And the more we connect with people, the more we're going to connect the dots between what we're doing in the office and what we're trying to do from a change initiative. So that's one of the big lessons from Tom Brady as well. So I hope this has given you some guidance on some lessons that Tom Brady might teach us about being successful. And even if you're not a Tom Brady fan or an American football fan, hopefully this has given you some lessons from athletics and sports in general that can be translated into success in a business or digital transformation.
So that was the video for my YouTube channel about Tom Brady and some of the leadership lessons for digital transformations. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from that, Darian?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think there's so much that you can learn from Tom Brady and his leadership style. I also really enjoyed the part where you talked about how Brady changed and adapted his leadership style to complement the coaches that he had, or depending on the team that year, which I think is also a sign of, like, while you're going through a transformation, you have to maybe change your leadership style during each maybe phase, whether it's phase 0 or the implementation or the go live. You kind of have to maybe switch your approach a little bit or tweak it per the phase. So I think that was a really, really great point. But a question I have for you to kind of continue this conversation from the YouTube video is, how, in your experience, how can leaders effectively balance individual motivations during a business transformation and team success, as Tom Brady did with his teammates and coaches throughout the years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, as you were saying that, I was thinking about one of the players that was on one of Tom Brady's Super Bowl teams. It was actually, I think it was a year they lost the Super Bowl. They went to 10 Super Bowls. They won 7 of them, and 3 of them they lost. And one of them that they lost was a season where they actually went undefeated. One of the few times it's ever happened where a team went completely undefeated in the regular season. They went undefeated in the playoffs to get to the championship, but they lost in the championship. I think it was one of the times they lost to the New York Giants. But that year that they had that perfect season, minus losing the Super Bowl, they had a player on that team. His name is Randy Moss, and he's a receiver. He's a wide receiver that they had gotten from the. He originally, I think, started with the Minnesota Vikings. The reason I bring him up is he was a superstar receiver, but he was kind of like a troubled team guy. Like, he was really good individually. He's super talented, one of the best receivers that ever played, but he struggled to have chemistry with the teams he was on. And so when New England brought him in, I thought it was kind of weird. I thought, wow, that's kind of weird. You've got Tom Brady, you've got the Super Bowl caliber team, and now you're bringing in this guy who's all about himself, and he's a super individualistic, not a diva, but he's just sort of a showman or whatever. And that's part of what made him a great receiver and fun to watch. But it created problems with some of his teams. But that year he played with the Patriots, he had an awesome season and he fit in really well. Like, he seemed to become part of a team, and that whole team was really good. I still don't fully understand how they lost the championship, but they did. They lost the championship that year, but they played awesome, and that was one of their best seasons despite that loss. So it just sort of reminded me of, like, how there's something about what New England, what Tom Brady, what his coaches did that created this environment where even these superstar troubled team people could come in and sort of fit in and be part of a system and part of a broader team. And so I think that's the way you have to look at it, is you have to recognize that in any organization, you have superstars, you have lower performers, and most people are sort of average, just hardworking people. And so you've got to figure out how you bring all these people together that have different motivations and different perspectives and different experiences. How do you bring them all together and get going in the same direction? And the two things I'd say is it starts with these two things. One is going to be alignment from the top and making sure that the executives have painted a clear vision of what direction they want the organization to go, including with this project as it relates to supporting that overall direction. So if we don't have that clarity of direction and that clear vision and leadership and communication from the top, nothing our team does is going to gel. It's not going to be cohesive. And so you've got to start there. And then the other part of it is making sure you understand and listen to people and understand what their motives are. I don't know what Tom Brady or what the New England Patriots did with Randy Moss to make him feel like he was part of the team, or I don't know what they did. There's some secret sauce they had there that got him to not to fall into line, but just to do what he does, but do in the context of a bigger goal. And that's what you have to do with employees in your organization too. You have to look at, how can we understand where they're coming from, understand their motives, understand all the great knowledge and talent and tribal knowledge and skills they've built over time, recognize that there's some strength there. We're not just going to throw that stuff out, but how can we help those people be better with, improved tool sets and processes and all that stuff. So I think a lot of it is just understanding your team, understanding where they are, where they've been, and ultimately syncing that back up to the overall direction that gets set from the top of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I know another thing that was really emphasized in this video and then also the article was Tom Brady's emphasis on rewarding the unsung heroes on his team. And I think it's the same with, the frontline employees or the people that are in there doing the work every single day, really rewarding them and recognizing them during the digital transformation. That's something that is obviously super important. But how do you suggest some organizations can do that and recognize the unsung heroes in their organization to make them feel like they are a part of the digital transformation and that they do care about what they think?
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Tom Brady, he talked about his offensive line, which are the guys that block, that basically protect him, keep the other defenders from getting to Tom Brady. So those are the guys he always would praise. He'd say these guys are the reason why I'm so good is because they give me time to think and do what I do. And if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be able to play the way I do. And so that's a good lesson for digital transformations is you have to look at all these people you have, and instead of thinking of it from the perspective of Darian, you've got this old, outdated way of doing things. You've got the spreadsheet that's just super inefficient. It's got all these errors in it. Rather than saying, well, let's just get rid of that stuff and let's just put in a new system and give you a new tool set, I have to understand, well, Darian's been doing something right all this time. I mean, maybe she built that spreadsheet. Maybe it's not perfect. Maybe it's limited, but there's still something there. So let's understand that and let's build on that. And so I think that's a big part of it is recognizing that what you've done all this time has gotten us to where we are. Now let's figure out how we can improve what you've been doing, not because what you have been doing all this time sucks, but because there's a better way now that we have new technologies and things change over time. So let's help Darian be more successful in that way. And so I think that's the way to view it. And it's sort of a mindset shift of rather than coming at it from the perspective of, oh, that's outdated, let's put in new technology. It's more, oh, we're doing some really good stuff here. There's some secret sauce in what we're doing. Let's unpack that a bit more and let's build on it and continue from there. So I think to me, that's a big part of it. And also just including people in the project. I mean, just by including, you can't include everyone, unfortunately, but, you want to at least include pockets of, people from all the different pockets of the organization in the process so that they feel like they're part of it rather than the change happening to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I know the last thing I kind of want to touch about is about Tom Brady's leadership style complementing his coaches, because I think this is a part I really relate to from college athletics of if, your captain on the team is disagreeing with the coaches or the assistant coaches are disagreeing with the head coach and vice versa. It makes it really complicated and hard to know who to follow and what to listen to. And, everybody on the team gets different opinions and it causes not great cohesiveness with the team, right? So I think that was a great point that he made during this, because if your leadership compliments the coaches and agrees with the coaches, people have one thing to follow and it becomes very simple. People aren't telling you 5 different ways of doing something. So I think with that, Eric, how important is leadership alignment during transformation, and how can companies ensure that the leaders are all working in sync and not saying different things to, the same people, and then people are like, I don't know what to do and who to follow?
Yeah, I mean, that's an area where companies like ours, the third-party advisors can help drive that alignment. And not that we make decisions for our clients or tell them how they should be running their business, but what we're good at is facilitating, bringing everyone together and getting them to agree on and understand some of the trade-offs and decisions that need to be made in these projects. And so giving a framework that says, these are all the things we've got to decide and align on. It's okay that we're not aligned right now. That's fine. But let's not jump in and start expecting our team to start deploying new technology when we're not aligned and on the same page. So that's why that phase 0 implementation planning is so important, because one of the key things you've got to do in that phase is that executive alignment. You've got to get people on board with, making some of these key decisions. And so there's dozens of decisions that need to start at the top at the executive level. And that sort of sets the parameters of the guardrails for what it is we're going to do as a project. And then once we have that in place, it's a messy process, and that's okay, because we're all different people. Executive teams have different opinions, but the key is you've got to come together and you've got to get agreement on what direction you're heading. And just going in the same direction is way more important than making the best or the right decision. If you're making a decision that you're uncertain of, or it's imperfect for whatever reason, just the fact that you have all agreed on that direction, that to me is more important than what the actual decision was. Of course, you don't want to make a terrible decision. But assuming you've got mediocre to really good decisions you could be making, even if you're making a mediocre decision, even if you're all on the same page, as long as you're on the same page, that's going to be much more beneficial. So I think that's where it starts is just making sure that you have that clarity up front. Then the digital strategy, the way you roll out the technologies, the way you manage your implementation should all sync back to that overall strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what a great topic. That was a great YouTube video, great idea to include that and relate it to, digital transformation.
Yeah, thank you. And a fun fact that was in the background of that video was that's actually my son's high school football team. So he's actually in the video in the background. You can't see him because it's all blurred out. But that I wanted to do it on a football field, so I went to his football practice one day to film that. So that's him in the background. But yeah, so I'm glad you like it, and hopefully having the visual optics of football happening in the background added some interest to it as well. So good stuff and a good conversation. Thanks for all your help with this episode, Darian, and thank you to the audience for all the great questions. Look forward to next week's episode. You can find new episodes in the meantime or past episodes in the meantime by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. Every Wednesday, new episodes, shows produced by Major Tom Productions, sponsored by Third Stage Consulting. If you'd like to learn more about Third Stage, which is the company that I work for, you can go to thirdstage-consulting.com. We provide independent tech agnostic consulting services to clients that are going through digital transformations, including digital strategy and software selection, the implementation planning, phase 0 type stuff, as well as actual implementation with program management, change management, process improvement, et cetera. So learn more about us. You can reach out to me as well if you'd like to learn more about the company or how we can help your transformation journey. So hope you all have a great week and look forward to seeing you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care.